Hi, Nikki from Flipping Spain here. All right, are you ready for the next video in this series where we're going to actually look at assessing the property itself? Now, there are a few key things that we're looking for here. One, does reality match the listing? It can be really hard to tell from a listing what the layout is or the actual condition of the property. So that's why walking through is super important to get a feel for that. Do all the details match? Second thing, the layout. And this is probably the most important. Does it work? If you have to do some renovation, is it easy to reconfigure? Are your services in the right place? The third is the overall condition. This is where we're going to assess what kind of work needs to be done in order to appeal to our target renter or our target buyer. And you're always going to notice some things when you're there at the property that you would have never noticed if you hadn't walked through. That might sound like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised at the number of people who buy something sight unseen and get really screwed. Now, once we've walked through and assessed the work, we can do the budget, and that renovation budget, most importantly, informs what we can afford to pay for the property, because the list price is just a list price. Then we have to ask ourselves, how close is the list price to our desired purchase price? What factors might allow us to negotiate? And then overall, we're really just looking for deal breakers. You've lived in houses, you know what appeals to you, what will appeal to your buyer, and you know those things that kind of make you think, I'm not sure. And when you're walking through a space, I heavily rely on just my feeling about the property, my feeling about the area. I won't own something and rent it to someone else if I wouldn't feel comfortable living there. So we're going to look for those kinds of deal breakers. And all of those things together will help us determine whether we want to put it in an offer or not. So let's walk through the process together. Now, as we've seen, listings in Spain are a little bit hit or miss. So for example, I looked at these pictures of this property, and they're really not stellar photos at all. It was very hard to get an idea of what the property actually looked like and what the layout was. And of course, there's very rarely a floor plan, which is really frustrating. Until I walked through, it was really hard to get a feel for it. First of all, I had no idea what the stairway looked like, what it felt like to climb to the third floor. Walking through, I was able to understand where the rooms were in relation to each other. This used to be a 3-bedroom and was converted to a 2-bedroom. Without walking through it, I would not have been able to tell how that was done and whether it could be reversed in a way that made sense. I also wasn't able to tell that the kitchen is actually in pretty good shape, and it definitely didn't do justice to the views. Other things you're going to be able to tell from a walkthrough are what type of shared walls. Are there other apartments adjoining you? Are there other buildings adjoining you? How did the balconies connect? And these are things that are important to think of for noise if people are outside late, smoke if you've got smokers near you, whether that's going to drift into your apartment. Privacy, can you see from balcony to balcony or not? Also the size of the kitchen and the bathroom. One key thing is, do the details match? So for example, they say it's a 3-bedroom, but when you go and look at it, you actually start to see it's not a 3-bedroom. I had 2 instances recently. Looking at the photos, you can see a bedroom, you see another bedroom, you see another bedroom. It's really hard to tell that one of the bedrooms is trapped. Interestingly, I found another property in the same building that shows the floor plan. And from that one, you can see that you entered this bedroom here, but you entered this bedroom here and the 3rd bedroom from the 2nd bedroom, which is just not going to work. This was also the case in this next property, where as you can see, we look at one bedroom that's separate, and then we walk through a bedroom to get to 1 or 2 more bedrooms. And that's just not practical for owners or renters. They're not going to want that. If you say 3 bedrooms, they're going to expect 3 distinct bedrooms. So that takes us to number 2, which is the layout. How does it work as it is, and how easy is it to improve? Now, there are some functional things like that, such as where is the plumbing located, in case you want to add a 2nd bathroom. A lot of places have the kitchen and the bathroom clustered together. So that means you have to ask, is there a big enough bedroom adjoining one of those that you could take some space out of and not have to run plumbing to the other end of the apartment? Can you reconfigure the bedrooms? Now, sadly, so many of these listings do not have floor plans. So I end up relying on drawn out floor plans like this, which again, I wouldn't be able to create if I hadn't walked through the property. So for example, in this property, you can see we've got 2 bedrooms. It used to be 3 bedrooms, but in this instance, a wall was removed from the living room to create a larger space, and they lost a bedroom in the process. Now, as an investor, going from 3 beds to 2 beds can severely impact our resale value and will definitely impact our rental income, especially if we're renting by room. So that means you have to make it really fancy and get a high-end renter or buyer, which is going to shrink your pool of potential buyers and renters, or you have to figure out a way to reconfigure. So having walked through this space, it's quite a small apartment. And to put a 3rd bedroom in, it's going to make the bedrooms kind of small, and it's going to make the living room really small. This is a case of where if we look at the layout and we think about what we'd ideally want it to be, you'd have to reconfigure everything. And it's probably not worth it in this instance because the whole property is actually in decent shape. And that leads us to our 3rd thing that we're assessing, and that is the overall condition. So what work needs to be done in order to appeal to our target renter or buyer? Or what work needs to be done to make it livable at all? So going back to our first example, this property needs a kitchen. It doesn't have one. It also doesn't have any heating. So those 2 things are going to have to be added before you can rent it to anyone. Now, the nice thing about this is that it can make it very difficult for someone to get a loan to buy the property. They're going to prefer to have cash because the bank doesn't want to own something that isn't habitable. And that's something to think about is like, what can you do now, or what has to be done now? And what could you possibly do later? So let's look at windows. In this apartment, some of the windows have been replaced, some of them have not. And ideally, you're going to want to update the windows for noise, for energy efficiency, and just practicality. I love the double open windows, and they don't exist in every apartment. So I think for things like airflow, those are a good value add. And then you can think about how do you add value for your targeted renter. Since I'm thinking of renting to auxiliaires who are coming from abroad, a lot of whom are going to be from North America and have certain housing standards or preferences that might not get met in your average apartment here in Spain, I can do very simple things like add screens to my windows so that the flies and the mosquitoes don't get in, because there are no screens. They're really hard to find. That's also where I prefer to have the opportunity to add a half bath or a second bath if there's only 1 bathroom and you have 3 bedrooms sharing, just because it's an expectation amongst those kinds of renters. And I'll be able to charge more for that because they're going to prefer my place to a place that doesn't have those kinds of amenities. Now, once we've walked through and we've seen what needs to be done, then we can start to put together a budget. So we'll go back to our spreadsheet because the renovation budget informs what we can afford to pay for the property. If we need to have a certain value at the end, or we want to be able to charge a certain percentage of the amount we've invested, for example, if we've paid $100,000 for the property, we want to be able to charge $1,000 in rent, then we need to understand how the renovation costs plus the purchase price add up. This is sort of reverse engineering what your offer is going to be. It does not have to be the list price. And that's another thing where we've kind of kept an eye on the market so we know how fast things are moving. And I love to look out for things that aren't moving that quickly. This apartment is a great example. I've seen it listed by 3 different real estate agencies online, all with different prices, and all have had price drops. Now, if I factor in that it is probably acceptable to offer up to 10% below the list price, even in this current market, without offending anyone, because we don't want them to just say, oh, I don't want to deal with them. We want it to be a conversation. Then that puts me in a really good position to hit my target price. And at the end of the day, you don't ever want to force something. If I can say, I can only pay 80,000 euro because this is my budget and this is what I'm going to have to spend on the property, plus all the additional costs involved in purchasing a property, then someone will respect that. They might not like it. They might say no to it, and that's okay. Then I know that that's not the deal for me, and I will go and look at the next one. All right. So none of this is rocket science. anyone who's lived in a house and has a general sense of the aesthetics or what pleases them or what they're comfortable with can walk through a property and get an idea of how it would appeal to a renter or a buyer, or what would need to be done. Now, you may not be able to estimate costs or understand how to reconfigure things, but that is something that your contractor can help you with, and it's something you can learn over time. So when I walk in, I'm looking for deal breakers. And those can be concrete things like there's a lot of noise bleed through from the neighbors, or my neighbor's backyard looks like a hoarder lives there, as I saw when I went to see this house. There's a really difficult layout, and I just can't see any way of creating 3 true bedrooms in the place. Those are things where I'm going to say, on to the next one. And then there's sort of softer things like, is there a lack of natural light? Is there a lot of noise coming from the neighbors? That's going to bother one person. That's not going to bother me. But my thought is if it bothers me, it's going to bother some other people. And anytime you have something that's questionable, it's going to shrink your pool of potential buyers or renters. And that's not what we want. So that's assessing the property. It's really helpful to just get in and walk through as many things as you can. Going to see listings is free. Don't feel like you're wasting someone's time. You're learning and you're moving yourself closer to being able to make a decision about buying. And so that makes it worth everyone's while. So get out there and look at some things. If you've got questions about assessing properties, drop me a comment. Please like and subscribe. And join me for the next video where we're going to put this whole process together from beginning to end. And maybe, just maybe, we'll buy something.